Alrighty. Good evening from New Jersey and from.
Alabama.
Okay, good. I had to check. And I am Ria, call sign N2RJ. I run Ria Chat Cam Radio, and welcome to Two Chicks in a Radio. And we have Dixie DX. Go and introduce yourself.
W4DXY, Cat. Hello, everybody, to another episode of Two Chicks in a Radio. How's everybody doing tonight?
Well, I'm doing good. We have a very special guest tonight, so I think we're gonna shift things around. We're gonna bring him on first, and because I think he's a very good guest to have on. So we'll introduce to you none other than, here we go, Farhan VU2ESE, and he used to have another call sign, which he'll tell us about. But good morning to you there, and you are where?
Hi, Ria, Cat. This is Farhan, VU2 Echo Sugar Echo. I'm in Hyderabad, South Central India.
Okay.
And it's early morning. You can see probably in the window the day is breaking through. So good morning from India.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to come and chat with us. We know you have a lot of good new things going on, and I've really been following your work for a long time. So I was really excited to have you on. So Kat is, you know me, right? I knew you from Facebook. I used to read all your, when you were on the platform, I used to read all your musings and stuff like that of the situation in India, because I share that heritage, right? Because my foreparents are from India. But at the same time, I enjoy your intellectualism in terms of amateur radio and also the cool engineering projects you did and such. Kat is a new ham. She recently got licensed, and she was following her dad. So, Kat, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story in amateur radio?
Well, as you know, my dad had his amateur radio license. He actually got his general license with his friend Doc. So it was all part of him being a prepper. So that's what started that process. So him and his friend decided to study for their ham radio license. They went and got their tech, and then they went and got their general together. And I just recently got licensed June of last year.
Wow. So, Farhan, why don't you tell us a little bit about what got you started in amateur radio?
Well, the story is pretty simple. I have been, a sort of an electronics junkie, probably, since the time I, came to my senses, so to say. One of my earliest memories, by the way, is that of the live broadcast over BBC, I think, and my dad bought a new radio to just tune into this of Apollo 11 landing. So, that's stuck. I still remember, Dad hunched over the phone, radio, and we all gathering and saying that, man's going to land on moon. So radios played actually a fairly strong part in my family heritage in a different way. Two of my uncles actually worked with the All India Radio.
Nice.
So the whole idea of this magic of being able to communicate over distance was actually something which really, as a kid, fascinated me. And I had actually gotten this handbook. Actually, Campbell sent this book back to me from New York called "Having Fun with Radios," which are really small time, very tiny experiments with one or two transistors, and one of it was to be able to make an AM broadcast radio, which could broadcast transmitter, which could broadcast across probably the length of the room, which I never could manage to get it going because it had stuff like loopstick antenna and transistors 2N706, which are just not available in India. But that was my first attempt at getting a radio wave out of my table. But that remained for a long time. And then what happened was one evening in my school, VU2 RBI is actually brother-in-law, VU2 Mike Yankee Suri. He actually walked in with a couple of other hams, and they set up a ham radio station to demo it to us kids. So, in a way, it was a very conventional introduction to ham radio for me, much like many of us. That the moment I saw this, and this was, I remember, it was an evening about 5 p.m. and the 40-meter band is just booming with signals, and I just couldn't imagine that there were these small sets, and one of it was an HRO radio. I actually still have that particular radio right here in my shack. I took it from Suri. So, and a homebrew AM transmitter, and with just that, small setup, they were able to, go across to Singapore. They were, on the other hand, hitting Middle East. It was a wonderful time, that evening. The band was completely open, and I was entirely hooked. And I followed him back home, saying, I need to get into this. Just tell me where to sign. So it took me about a year to year and a half. No, actually, at that time, I wasn't old enough to get a license. You had to be 14 years to get a license. I'm talking about probably 78 or 79. And the day I crossed over to 14, we were all actually at Delhi, writing. We wrote the exam and came to Delhi. And in Delhi, the Asian Games were on, and I was volunteering along with other people of National Institute of Amateur Radio. So we, in Delhi, actually, the WPC guy came and handed over the call signs to us. So in 81, I formally got my first call sign, and then I've almost always used homebrew radios since then. I spend more time building than operating, but I do operate mostly CW, very slow CW, 5 to 10 word CW, rack queue with friends, and if any DX comes my way, it's a pleasure, but I don't really hunt for DX. Right. I hardly do any contesting myself, so I'm a little wary of the sBITX that we will talk about, because I've taken a lot of inspiration from CW contesters, people like you, and your experiences to build this radio.
Okay, so I want to ask Kat a question, because I think she has an important answer for this. Have Kat's going for a general license. So in the United States, we have 3 classes of license. We have the technician, we have the general, and the general really starts you. So technician has limited HF privileges. The general is where you get the bulk of your HF privileges, and the extra is where you get extra, basically, HF privileges.
Okay.
So Kat is studying for her general.
Wow.
She's been, life has been getting in the way, but after you get your general, you're going to get an HF radio. Have you looked at the prices of HF radios? Tell us how much they cost, and what do you think, what do you think about it?
Well, I really want the IC 7300, and that's a really, really good radio. And my Heil Pro 7 headset actually interacts with that very well. So that one is very, very up there on the list of how much it is. So it's well, what I was going to get it for is going to be a lot more than what I was going to get it for. So I think, what is it, like it's over $1,000, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about 1,000. It's about 1,000 US dollars, and that's a lot of money for a lot of people.
Yes.
Yeah. Why I bring that up is because, I've been following your work, Farhan, in the first ever radios I ever saw from you were the BITX 20, and I actually bought a board set from Far Circuits at Dayton, when they had Dayton at Hara Arena.
Right.
And Far Circuits had like a big tent, and they used to sell circuit boards. So I bought the circuit board. I actually built the radio, and I kind of got it to work properly, and I still have it. I don't have it here with me, but it works. And I mentioned, and I saw in your article that you mentioned that a lot of your motivation was that a lot of people didn't have the money to buy a big expensive radio, so you wanted to make something easy to build and something easy to use with common off-the-shelf parts. You mentioned in India you have constraints with parts. I had the same experience in Trinidad and Tobago. We had like 1 or 2 electronic shops, and the parts they carried were more replacement parts for appliances and TV sets. You didn't have much in the way for radio experimenters. So I imagine that kind of motivated you. So tell us about the early days and how that began to evolve.
So what happened was that um, there's a little bit of history, if I may just digress a
Mhm.
little, that ham radio in India started with mostly the British, right? And they were the ones who brought ham radio sets here. I'm talking about pre-World War, right? Days.
Right.
And from them, it actually percolated to the tea planters, people who would actually own estates, because they were
Right.
really far away from cities and they needed some way to communicate, and this was one way out. But it remained
Hmm.
mostly a rich, and I should say boys club, because most of them were men,
Right.
and very few, probably less than 100 radio hams, right, until 45, even into 50s and 60s. And about that time, and you'd actually see this, that a lot of, for example, film stars, politicians, for example, Rajiv Gandhi, the prime minister, was a radio
Right.
ham. Amitabh Bachchan is a radio ham. I mean,
Oh, he
you'd see them.
is.
Oh, yeah. I don't know whether
So
he still has a call sign, but he is a radio ham.
I kind of remember that Amitabh
Yeah,
Bachchan was a
yeah,
was a was a because I watch a lot of the Bollywood
right.
movies. Yeah, we
Yeah,
grew up watching that. We'd go to the cinema at 10 a.m. and then come out in the
okay.
afternoon.
Right. Binge watch. The analog binge watch. So,
Yeah.
but in early 70s, they decided, some of the radio hams decided that we need to make it, open to others, etc. And they started, sort of evangelizing ham radio.
Mm.
And at that time, it hit them that there were no low-cost sets available, and there was this huge push to get, these in. But these are pre-internet days. I mean, you'd be really, really lucky to have an ARRL handbook, a couple of years old.
Mm.
That was actually the most prized possession. I mean, it's called the Bible. People would bind it and like very religiously, actually, carry it around, and you'd say, "Can you lend this to me for an hour? I'd like to, photocopy a circuit or whatever."
Oh, I
So
know that much.
yeah, I mean, you followed that, right? So what happened was that there were a couple of designs coming up, but most of the designs at that time centered around Morse code. They were 807 jobs, right? It was VFO feeding into an 807, and you'd have a Second World War surplus radio, either a BC348 or an HRO. And I
Hmm.
actually collect some of them. I have them in my shack right away. So but it was difficult to get onto SSB, because there was sort of a myth around SSB, and very few people actually managed to build their own SSB radios. In fact, in the 70s, there were just 3 people who had SSB radios which they had built by themselves. Okay, the first was VU2NR, very good home brewer. Then there was VU2RM, Rao,
Mm.
and there was VU2KNN, Rajan. So these are the only 3 people who probably had, even JN, VU2JN, the famous home brewer, he never attempted an SSB because he was a CW guy. He never even required it. So with this, in this scenario, we did not have much of sets. And the first set actually which hit us, which was based on Indian designs, was by VU2NR, Raju. And this
Right.
was when he turned 60 years old, and he called it NR60. The NR60 was one big board, no power amplifier, no VFO, which you had to add to your own, but it was based on these coils, regular coils, which you wind and then you put them into cans, etc. So winding those coils, getting it to not self-oscillate, etc., was a big challenge. And then
Right.
VU2RM came out with his own design, but these designs were fairly conventional, based on the 70s technology. And I tried actually building some of them. I sort of, got them working, but not really, too much.
Hmm.
But I did get on air, and mostly on CW. At times I would just use them as a receiver more than anything else. But then the hobby took a break. I, sort of got married. I lost my license. I didn't even have a place to put up an antenna. And it's only when I came back to this house where we are now in 2002 that I was getting interested in ham radio. And at that time, Wes Hayward, Campbell, and Larkin's book, The Experimental Methods in RF Design, came
Okay.
to us. And I was actually doing business along with my friend Anil, Sugar Mike Zero, Mike Fox Charlie. So I was in Stockholm, I remember that. And our third partner, who's not a ham, Ehsan, he actually got 2 copies for us, sort of a Christmas gift. So That book completely changed my attitude towards home brewing, because what that did was it said that there are just four kinds of circuits that you need to bother about: amplifiers, filters, oscillators, um, mixers, right? There are just four circuits: mixers, oscillators, amplifiers, and filters. If you know how to build each of them, and each of them can just be built with one transistor, a couple of capacitors and resistors, etc., then you just combine these together and build your own radios, and everything works with in and out at 50 ohms. So it really simplified the approach to building radios. And it was so taken in by that on my return flight coming back from Stockholm, I mean, it's a long flight because you have to get down at Dubai, then change another flight, then come to Bombay, then change another flight and come here. So 3 hops away, I actually scribbled a radio together. And when I came home and I sat down, in 3 days, I could actually completely build the radio. And at this time, I didn't even have an oscilloscope. I just had a multimeter with me. So the first thing I built was a signal generator for that. Actually, I still have the signal generator. I use it even to this day.
Amazing.
And that started working. And I ran to Paddy's place, V2 Papa Echo Papa, and said, Paddy, let's fire this up. And the day we fired up, we were again very lucky. The band was open 20 meters, and we managed to snag 3 continents, within an hour or two. Paddy's an incredible operator. And that actually began my, this entire business of doing radios. And I built this radio, and I didn't know, but on just a lark, with a lot of, courage, I wrote to Wes, W7ZOI, saying that, I've built this radio using your book, and I'm really happy with it. And he actually wrote back a really, really inspiring email. And till this day, I'm really, completely blown away by how much he can communicate through just emails, right? I mean, an email of about probably, 200, 300 words, but the amount of learning that happens, interacting with Elmers like him is really incredible. So following that, then I did the BITX 20, and my idea of BITX 20 was to keep the radio's price down to 500 rupees, which is about $7. And one can still build it, using just that much money. Hello, can you hear me, Ria?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah,
okay.
Sorry.
Sorry.
You dropped out for a second.
Yeah, no, I was saying that one could still build the BITX, with parts and without a circuit board for the same amount.
Wow.
Yeah. But, these are analog radios. Even the micro BITX, where we said, okay, from one band, let's, see, is it easy enough? I mean, there was this lore that people could build, single band radios, homebrew them easily, but it's very difficult to homebrew a multi-band radio. So at probably 20% more complexity, we could add multi-band, which is the micro BITX.
Okay, so $7. I mean, that's that is nothing short of amazing. And you use common off-the-shelf parts. You use what kind of amazed me was you use the TV balun cores. Now,
yeah,
your TVs in India, they're 75 ohms, right?
Yes. So you have a balloon, which is basically I think it's also called a pig nose. Let me just see if I can pull some of those out.
Right.
So these they were used in the TV balloons to basically, I have a whole box of them somewhere here. Oh, here, I think. Yeah. So I'll just hold this up. I don't know if you can see this.
Okay. Yeah. So it's a binocular core.
Yeah. But so I bought a bunch of these. I mean, these, because the television was pretty big and a domestic industry, it would cost about ₹1, which is about, probably about 7 cents.
Right.
No, not even 7 cents, 2 cents each, right? So these, and the other important thing was that we didn't have toroids here, right? I mean, that was very difficult. So I used the tap washers. Again, let me see if I can show you the tap washer. The tap washer is essentially used in the taps, in the faucets, and there's a plastic ring there. It's a nylon ring. So
yeah,
I don't know if I still have them around, but yeah. So they were used as toroids, and that actually really helped me, because what happened was that once you say, okay, I'm going to use this, but how do you know whether they work or not? So that was the important thing with experimental methods. The book teaches us, which is you can measure it, right? So
Right.
does this give enough inductance? So you basically wind this, put it with a known capacitor, so that coil and capacitor form a resonator, and then you use this signal generator and swing through it and see where the peak is coming. Then you know how much inductance it's giving. So you've got a way to indirectly measure the inductance. So basically, I built my entire lab first, which probably in a week's time you can build it. A frequency counter, a signal generator, an attenuator, an RF probe. Again, these things cost about a couple of tens of dollars to put together. But once you have some basic test equipment, then you can actually go on and build better and better stuff. Eventually, I bought a tech scope, Tektronix 465M, which actually really upped my game with building stuff.
Okay. Wow. I'm blown away. So basically what you're saying is that so we have somebody actually in the chat who she did a video on making an antenna, and she really did it artistically. So you kind of have the MacGyver approach. You use what is available to you, and by trial and error you actually find components for your radio, and that is so cool, because I find today in engineering you have a lot of people who basically they rely upon spec sheets, and they have to go and get everything precise, but if you live in a country that doesn't have access to all of the latest readily available materials, you have to make do.
Actually, more than trial and error, it's measuring, right? So that's the key thing. I mean, you unless you put numbers on the stuff, you don't know. So you say that this transistor, does it work as an amplifier? Now, for example, in the BITX, original BITX, if you pull out the circuit diagram, you'll see that the transistor is a BC547. It's a transistor which costs, again, a rupee, which is about probably 2 cents. Or 2 to 3 cents. So now what happens with this transistor? It's supposed to be an audio transistor, right? It's not supposed to be an RF transistor. So what you do is you go to these shops, and I'll actually show you some of these shops now, where you can actually buy a single resistor. Even today, that's the incredible thing about my city, that you can actually go to electronics shops and buy components which are available off the shelf. You don't have to wait for a couple of weeks to get them in. So you get all these bunch of transistors. You made one amplifier circuit, and you keep soldering one transistor after the other and figure out which one works. And you say, okay, this works. This is giving me a gain of 10. So you know that this can work. Then you put that.
That's pretty amazing. So it speaks to kind of like the ham, and you speak to the ham spirit of you make do with what you have. You experiment, you measure, right, and then you see what you have locally. And it's very nice, especially in your area, because I remember we had, like I said, we have the local electronic shop, but a lot of our electronic experience there was based upon. So you have this in India too, where they have the cars with the loudspeakers on top, and whenever there's like a funeral or something, they go around the village and they announce. And the electronic shops, that was one of the things they sold. They sold like the amplifiers, but especially they did speaker repair. Okay, so because they did the speaker repair, they had the coils, right, and the voice coils, and they had a wire. So you could buy the enameled wire to wind coils. Otherwise, you weren't getting magnet wire anywhere. So you get that. You get the small signal transistors, the 2N2222, and the 2N3904 and 3906. And you get those little components. You get like the ferrite rod, because, the little broadcast sets had them. Excuse me. And you use those to build our radios. So when I was growing up, and this is a common thing, whenever somebody was going out of the country, they any electronics minded savvy person would send a list and said, if you pass on like a Radio Shack or something,
get this stuff right.
Because the rest of it's unobtainium. So here you have Mahima, Mahima
Hey,
is
Mayma. Hello.
my daughter.
Hey.
I actually came to ask you something.
Yeah. Okay. Just 1 second.
One sec.
Sure. So, Kat, do you are you on air right now? Do you have a VHF rig?
I have a handheld. I have the ID
And
51A.
okay.
Yeah. Wow. That's right. She just asked if there was like water because we normally go to a natural spring and we get spring water from the natural spring.
Oh
She asked
wow,
if there was
really?
any left. Yeah, there's one in the state forest in New Jersey in
Okay.
Stoke State Forest. So you drive through the forest and there's like a tap off from the spring, and the state they test the water every few
Oh
weeks.
wow.
They run a water test to make sure it's good. So, but the water, it's really nice and cool, and it has a pleasant taste rather than you have the water from the
Right.
city
True.
that has the chlorine and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so Kat, I don't know if Kat's ever considered building a radio. I don't know if she's at that level yet because she just got licensed a while ago. But it's something we had Joe Eisenberg on a couple weeks ago, and he builds a lot of radios from kits, and he does a lot of homebrew stuff too. So you mentioned with the BITX 40, and there's something in particular I want to talk about with the BITX, the micro BITX, right?
Right. Yeah.
Which is a 40-meter rig. So the BITX
The
20
micro BITX is a multi-band. It's a BITX
Right.
40, which is a single band rig. Yeah.
Okay, so the micro BITX is 40. Right. Now you mentioned you had a manufacturing process for that, which was where you had a cooperative of women in India.
Yeah.
So could you explain what inspired that, and how does that help them?
Well, what happened was we sort of waddled into this process. What had happened was my local amateur radio club, Lamakan Amateur Radio Club, in fact, I'm wearing one of those T-shirts. So we had a convention, which is an eyeball. Now it's grown to be a full-fledged convention. So we decided to give a freebie away, and the freebie that we gave away was a BITX 40 circuit board, just a PCB. So the PCB comes into your kit bag, right, that you get for registration. And once people got this, they said, what the heck is this? How can I assemble this? Where do we get parts for this, etc.? So what we did is that, as I said, that in Hyderabad, there are 400 engineering colleges, by the way, in Hyderabad. Okay.
Wow.
Many of them of spurious quality, but there are 400 colleges, and these have students who need to make projects, right? So there are a lot of electronics shops which support them. So, you could go out and buy stepper motors, etc., whatever. So there are these shops available. And earlier they would also, supply it to the to the defense labs, which are there in Hyderabad, established in Hyderabad. So what happened was we got one of these guys to set up a shop at the convention center and get all the parts which were required to assemble this. I got the toroids from, rather the TV balloons from Delhi. And, he would put a couple of them in this and give a bag of parts away to these people to be assembled. So, if you already got the PCB for free for about 500 to 600 rupees, you would get this bag of parts and carry it away and build it. That's what we thought would happen, but that never happened. People just could not build and get the PCB going because, of the sad fact that there was a problem with the PCB itself. The PCB was not correct. It was a rush job. So what happened was ultimately we said, okay, why don't you guys come down and we'll do a workshop a couple of days after the convention, and we'll sort everybody out. And that didn't work either. So because people would turn the transistor around, they wouldn't scrape the enamel off the the regular stuff. I mean, they're all enthusiastic people, but they're not doing it right. Then I thought that, okay, this is not how it will work. What we will do is we'll get all the critical parts soldered professionally by someone else. So then we did that, and we got this one guy who is basically who had a couple of women that sit and solder this thing for the circuit audio amplifier makers, etc., the local industry. Even that person did not work out. So at this point, I just sort of gave up, and one of my ex-business partners, Ehsan, who's not a radio ham really, but he was sort of retired, and not doing anything much. So I told him, listen, I'll make a new PCB with everything sorted out, and will you just take on this as a voluntary job to get it all done on SMD machine so that everything is soldered properly and without any defects? He said, yeah, I can do that. It will be an interesting for me to do. So he took this, got this. We found a person who had almost closed down his factory, saying that the business has all gone off to China. And he had a pick and place machine, and he had a couple of people. He said, I can call some of the staff back, and let's see where this goes. So he ran the first 100 or 200, I don't know, of the BITX 40s. And now this whole thing about the coils, right? Somebody had to wind the coil. So we actually found out a lady that I was in touch with earlier, and I asked her, can you gather some more women with you who could, wind these coils for us? Fairly simple thing to do.
Right.
It doesn't take too much of. So they actually started this collective of sorts, which started winding coils, and then we put this entire thing together, and then we found that the magic was to do surface-mounted devices and this, and then we had to sell it. We didn't even have a company to sell it. Now, if you remember, the earlier BITX 40s were sold through a company called Paradigm Ecom Private Limited, because Ehsan had just set up this company without knowing what to do with it. So we started selling it through that company, which later on we changed the name to HF Signal. So we sort of, wandered into this business of kitting rather than anything else. And my whole idea of laying out the PCB was that you should still be able to figure out, take the circuit diagram and, sort of map it to the PCB, and if you could change things, you could snip off a block and put in another block if you wanted. So we built the PCB which was large and understandable, etc. So it was pretty well laid out.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. So yeah, it kind of harkens back to the days of in the United States, where you had like the women doing manufacturing in the factories and stuff like that during the war.
Yeah.
And so women tend to pick up that thing where they could have some meaningful employment. They do something, right, and then they build a radio. So I think that's really cool that you guys got that done. Of course, it sounded like a lot of it was by accident, but but it's good. I work in so I actually work in IT, and we have a lot of women in our IT. Right. Department, and I have actually a lot of colleagues in India, in Pune, Pune and Chennai. So they're, I work with we have to kind of navigate the time zones, but that's pretty cool. So let's jump into what comes next. So you conquered that world, and then now you're coming on to the sBITX, or was there anything before that?
Well, I've been knocking around trying to. 1 second, I'll just plug in my charger. So I've been knocking around, trying to wrap my head around software-defined radios. And frankly speaking, I'm an analog guy. Actually, I'll tell you, the rig that I use these days is this guy. This is my, regular rig. It doesn't even have a frequency readout. Right. But the thing is that professionally, I've actually worked with digital signals for a long time, audio codecs, etc., in my morning QTH at my workplace. So I thought all right, let me just step into this and see, where this goes. And one of the first things that we did was I built a sound codec card for a Raspberry Pi. So my problem with SDRs, and this is a personal preferences, because being an analog guy, I spend all my life sitting in front of a computer, right? Whether it's talking to people or writing code. Actually, that's what I do for a living. I write code, used to do rather. So it was, radio is something that, you switch off your computer and then you switch on your radio. And that's not what SDR is. In SDR, there's a lot of computer involved, and there is N1MM, there is SDR console, there are a whole bunch of things which happen. So I thought that to eliminate the computer from the radio, the best way is to put the computer inside the radio, right? So Raspberry Pi was one option, which is incredibly powerful. It's as good as a desktop computer. So if you put the Raspberry Pi inside the radio, that is going to be something. So, I mean, my son is a radio ham as well. He's VU3 ECQ. So I mean, he sits next to me, when he needs to concentrate here in the shack and read his stuff. So one day when I was building this sBITX, and I just got the codec going, so I wanted someone else to appreciate the audio quality. So while he was walking around, he saw this, and he saw that there was this Khalid, singing the song, what's it called, Young, Dumb, and Broke, or something like that, right? So he said, why is this coming on a radio? So I mean, on YouTube, how can your homebrew radio be playing YouTube? So, but the fact is, it's an incredible experience. I mean, there are so many things you can do with performance, right? As Rob Sherwood says, that we have hit a limit where the performance of receiver is good enough. It's the transmitter that you have to bother about and other stuff. But here, what I thought is that, for example, a car, right? So how many wheels can you put into a car? You can put 2, you can make it 3, you can make it 4. But by the time you come to the 5th wheel, you say it's not required. 4 wheels are good enough. Then you concentrate on other stuff, right? Does it have climate control? Does it have a moon roof? Does it have, I mean, all the other sort of stuff, right? Does it park itself? So same thing with the radio is, I think that beyond the IMD figures and IIP3, for example, how well does it work with WSJTX? I mean, that for me was a big thing.
Right.
So this is the first radio in which the full WSJTX will work inside the radio itself. You don't have to hook a separate radio, right? Because it's Raspberry Pi. So that works here. I've got the DX cluster, running on another tab. I have, the Morse code decoders, the FLDG, or I mean, anything. All of them can actually run inside the radio. And it's all completely integrated. You just pick up the radio and go. Because I do a lot of field work as well, which is why I have very small radios. So that's actually the exciting thing for me, which is I can take, for example, I do a lot of satellite work. So the G Predict is actually built into the radio itself. I don't have to carry a computer and hook everything up together.
So I'll pass over to Kat, but because I want her to ask a particular, I want to ask her a question about this. So you mentioned everything's all in one, and that's a trend I've been seeing going on with some of these even commercial radios, like the Flex radio, the Macintosh client.
Right. Yeah.
And
you've been using that, right?
Yeah, I've been. So I've had a close association with Flex Radio for a while, and they're good people. They make a good radio. It's a very expensive radio, so not everybody can afford one. But they actually some of the software, they've actually been putting the FD8 built in. Like this guy Marcus DL8 MRE from Germany, he wrote the client for iPad, and he also wrote the client for Macintosh, and he put in FT8 in that. So that is very nice. But it's very interesting now that you're doing this on very inexpensive hardware.
Right.
And I think that is going to be a huge game changer. Especially you mentioned Parks on the Air.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
So actually, let me show you if I can. I don't know whether you can see that. Wait, hang on. Can you see the radio?
And now I can see it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's a 7-inch screen, right? And I can actually. This is a bit of a problem. I've busted the touch screen here. This is actually showing some test signal here, but I can actually go down and start any other program that I need to, and then again come back here. So basically this is one of the apps. It's like having an app on your radio, right? I mean, other stuff would be apps, and it's a big screen. So it's a 7-inch screen, and there's a Raspberry Pi inside it. Otherwise, it's all completely analog electronics, as you can see. It's completely scratch built stuff. So sorry, yeah. So the idea was that this 7-inch screen, this costs $60, and the Raspberry Pi costs $100. So you put these together, that's $100. You take $100 away, and the rest of the electronics is another $100. So for $200, you will be able to get an SDR which will do a lot of stuff which will otherwise require about $10,000 worth of hardware in terms
Right.
of everything else.
Yeah, I mentioned the Flex radio system. You have to pay, well, like if you want top of the line, they start at like $2,000, and then they go up to like $6,000-$7,000, and then you have to get a computer, or you have to get a Maestro, or you have to get the built-in unit, which is extra money. So, Kat, I wanted to. This is a good segue into Kat. I don't know. I think I saw one of your videos where you're doing either Parks on the Air or something like that. Have you ever done any satellites at all, Kat? What sort of equipment do you use for satellites? No?
I've not done satellites. I did do a POTA. I did activate Montesano a few months back. We used the 705 for a little bit, and then switched over to the IC 703.
Wow.
What we eventually switched over to, because we didn't have enough power to get out because of the weather that was happening. So we needed to break through.
So I have an ICOM 705, and it's not a cheap. It's a nice radio. It's not an inexpensive radio either. We're talking here like a radio is $200 that you build, whereas you buy a commercial radio is like $1,300. And the thing is, I'm seeing here with this low cost homebrew radio, you're doing a lot of versatile things that you can't even do on the 705.
Yeah. See, the big thing here is because it's open source, then you can put a lot of open source software into it, right? I mean, most of the radios, for example, if you look at IC 7300, it's closed source, so you can't put anything new into it.
Right. Yeah, and that's definitely true. Now, whenever I think of India, I think of the biggest amateur radio manufacturer in India is Apache Labs, right?
Apache Labs. Yeah.
Have you ever done any cooperation with them? Do you know? Do you talk with them? Are they your friends?
Oh yeah. In fact, I mean, I've met them once, but one of the key people there, VU3WJM, Rahul, who's actually advised them a lot, and he's informally set up a lot of their production, etc. He's a very good friend of mine, and he actually designed the first BITX 20 circuit board much before we started kitting in 2004. And Rahul is a very good friend of mine. We talk almost every day on the phone. So I had gone to Apache Labs about 4 or 5 years ago. We were passing by Delhi, and Rahul said, "Why don't you drop into Apache Labs?" So I did go there, and we hung around for a bit. They were actually, setting up their 300 watts LDMOS power amplifier at that point in time, and they were testing it out, and it was really incredible. That's the first time I saw what pre-distortion does, and they could get the IMD down to less than 40 dB, and that's the first time they were doing it right in front of my eyes. I saw history being made there, and and when I was leaving, they said it was their car, so they sent me back to where I was staying with my friend. And as I got off the car, the driver said, there's this package for you. And they actually gave me an Anon 100D. I still have it bagged somewhere here. I've never used it, unfortunately, but I have it. Some of my friends have used it. Sharath has used it for a while. So I have an Anon 100D that, one of these days I'll fire up. My problem is that, because I'm completely a Linux person, I do not have a good Linux software which works with the Anon.
Right. So we have here a question. We have a question from the audience. I would like to take here from Don Gibbs. Here, KK4KUM. Has Farhan said if he uses Node-RED on the Raspberry Pi?
Sorry?
So he's basically asking if you've ever used Node-RED, because IBM has like a language with flows and stuff like that called Node-RED.
Yes. No, I haven't done that at all. I'm unfortunately, I don't pick up new languages pretty easily, so I write everything in C, pure C, not even C++. That's my.
So Node-RED, I think, is a little more. I don't know. So in engineering college, I actually used National Instruments. They had like the virtual instruments and stuff like that, right?
Okay.
Where you could draw things and you make instruments. So I think Node-RED is similar to that.
Okay.
LabVIEW
No,
from
no,
National
no.
Instruments.
Yeah.
So, well, I think it's interesting to look into. A lot of hams are using that for automation and such like that.
Okay.
So it's good. I do like Linux. I do a lot of Linux for a living. But my thing is more in, well, I have some top secret stuff I can't talk about, but I do more artificial intelligence and machine learning and such like that. So that's cool. All right. So as is customary, I'm going to have Kat do the news, and then maybe if you guys come back, the audience come back with a few questions for Farhan. I think everybody's so intrigued by this. I am like, first of all, I am totally intrigued in what is going on in India with all of this, how the ingenuity. And then second of all, I really like that you built this from scratch. So, that's wild. All right, so Kat, let's talk about the news. What do we have tonight?
Mute myself. Hey everybody, it is news time. So we've got a couple of things on our little radar over here. Apparently, there's this lady in Florida. She is a diabetic, and she claims that a local ham radio operator in her community is actually, when he operates, it's messing with her insulin pump. So she actually got I believe the HOA or whatnot to do an investigation on it. And the person came back and claimed that it was interfering. And I've read a little bit more into depth of this article because it's very, very interesting. And basically, she had switched out different pumps and things like that. And so she finally got it investigated. And this is what it came out. So I don't know if this is really if this really happened like that or not, but it's really going to go be interesting when it finally comes out to see if it actually really did do that. So over to Rhea, and let's see what she has to say about it.
Well, I was actually just up in Florida, and there are a lot of retirees there, and I wanna be a little cautious in terms of how we treat the story. I will say that the ARRL lab has actually been investigating and helping out with this, so that's good. We have the lab team helping them out to get to the root cause of this. I do know that a lot of radio amateurs are, they suffer from health issues that they need medical devices like insulin pumps, continuous glucose monitors, and other things, pacemakers and such like that. And most of them really don't have a problem. So I think there needs to be more investigation. I do think that a lot of this came down to how the media handled the story, and the press. They were like, this guy said, yeah, you took away my hobby, and then the media took that and they ran with that. And this lady said, well, this is my life you're talking about there. And, you have kind of like you put a one against the other. I don't think that came out well at all. I do think definitely, though, that the facts need to come out, one. And thanks for letting me know about my audio. And let's see here. Yeah. Oh, wow. What happened to my microphone? Okay. Yeah. So I'm saying that I think definitely we need to have the lab do some investigation. They claim that they hired some experts, and there are people all the time who make claims about radio frequency, energy, and waves and such like that. I will say this: I do have a very important video on my channel where we talk about RF safety, and there are some FCC guidelines that you need to follow. So if you haven't done that RF safety evaluation, I think it's good to do it, just so that you have yourself covered, that you're making sure that your station is legal and that everything is well documented as to how legal you are. All right, so that's a good one, Kat. What's the next story?
All right. Well, as you know, it is hurricane weather. So we are ramping up for this hurricane season. So Grace and Henry have been keeping our weather spotters very busy. The first hurricane, Grace, and the second hurricane, Henry, made landfall in Connecticut and had effects along Long Island to New Jersey. I'm sure you've witnessed some of this weather, Rhea.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Weather spotters from Hurricane Watch Net and also Skywarn were all in the air and observing the weather events. While Henry did cause a lot of flooding and some power outages, it was not nearly as devastating as Grace, which made landfall in Mexico. Yeah. And had sustained winds of 125 miles per hour.
Yeah.
Caused several fatalities, unfortunately. So so we definitely had two different hurricanes. One was in Mexico, and one actually hit close home to you. So how did that affect you, Rhea?
Well, there are two things with every hurricane, right? The one of them is the winds, and I think a lot of people focus on the winds. I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but usually people, they like to focus on the Jim Cantor, effect, right? Because if Jim Cantor comes to your town, you're screwed. Okay.
Yes. Matter of fact, when we had the tornado outbreaks here, or anytime we have suspected tornado outbreaks here, people float around a picture of Jim's vehicle somewhere in Alabama.
Oh boy.
And he's here, and everybody's like, if he's here, it's gonna be crazy. And then it turns out he didn't even come.
Yeah. But we had a lot of flooding in New Jersey, and flooding, believe it or not, causes power outages because trees they get waterlogged at the roots, and then they pop over and they fall on power lines. Huh?
That's what happened on my mailbox when it rained all that time. My mailbox just went.
Yeah. And but the weather spotters are important. So I actually got certified with Skywarn here with the local National Weather Service office in Mount Holly. And it's always good to be trained weather spotter and be able to report weather conditions. When we were up at having headquarters reopening at ARRL headquarters in Newington, one of the things we told the local member of Congress there, because he was there, was that amateur radio, that a lot of the reports that come in to the National Weather Service for Skywarn, for weather observations, tornadoes and such, come from amateur radio. So Mahima has a good point here. We use solar power. So, we have some of these little solar generators that we use. We have solar panels and batteries too. So that's good. All right. And our last story, I believe pertains to.
It actually pertains to you, Rhea. It pertains to your home of Trinidad and Tobago and their independence coming up, and it's the 59th anniversary. So since that is your native country, they're going to actually do a special event where they're going to have a special call sign of 9Y59IND. There is, from what I understand, there's a video on your channel that we are currently on. So go check that out, guys, and don't forget to like and subscribe to her channel if you haven't. And that they're going to be running this from the 12th of September.
Well, they're running from the 22nd of August
to the 12th of September. So
yeah.
So that's going to be very interesting, Net, I'm sure. And I'm sure you have a lot of friends and family still in Trinidad, right?
I have family. I have a good bit of friends. Not sure really about. Let's see here. I don't have that close, close family in Trinidad still. I do have a lot of friends. I do have some family, and a lot of the amateur radio community that I grew up with are still there. So, that's, I, it's nice that they're doing this, and I'm kind of jealous because here in the U.S., we never really get to have nice special event calls like that one. The last one we had was W100AW for 100 years of ARL, and that one basically took an act of Congress. So, it was kind of something. So anyway, all right. Well, thank you for the news. And if you guys have any comments about the news, be sure to place them in the chat or in the comments. So I don't know if Farhan is still around. I know probably his audio is still there. I see his camera disappeared, and he's back. So if you guys have any comments, questions for Farhan, you can post them up now.
Yes.
Yeah. Like I said, I really appreciate what you're doing. So let me move away from the tech for a little bit. One of our mutual friends is Bharathi VU2 RBI. So tell us, how do you know her? And she lives in your same town, doesn't she?
Yeah, she's moved back here because her husband retired, and so she's moved back here. And she's actually pretty active. I keep hearing her on the band all the time, but I've known her since late 70s, I would guess. Almost, 40 years now, 50 years. So
Wow.
she and I got our license almost at the same time. And since then, we've known each other pretty well. She's not much of a home brewer, but she's an incredibly talented operator, both on CW as well as SSB. She does frequently speak at our conventions, our club conventions as well. I'm long overdue to go and fix her antenna. She's just, bought a new antenna. She's struggling with it a bit. So I'll just take all my, equipment, SWR meters, Antuinos, the Nano VNA. So we are due to meet up soon. I was there for, some weddings in her family recently. That's the last time I actually physically met her. But we do speak on the phone, and Hyderabad has got actually a fairly large home brewing community, which is pretty tight, meaning, we do keep in touch with each other all the time and keep meeting each other all the time. So, Bharati has been almost like family to us for a long time.
Right. So Brian 88GI asks, are there plans or kits available for that 7-inch rig with the Pi? I did see you had code on GitHub. So what are the plans?
Yeah. Well, we did make one circuit board, and it turned out to be a little bad. So the circuit board is here, but unfortunately, it plugs in the Raspberry Pi in the wrong direction like this. So the Raspberry Pi is actually pointing inside the board rather than out. But I've just been assembling it. I hope to get a circuit board, 2 circuit boards, right? So there'll be a main board and there'll be a Raspberry Pi board. So the Raspberry Pi actually sits the first time. Actually, I'm showing it to anyone. This is the digital board. It's just got a codec on it. It's a 24-bit codec. So this plugs onto the Raspberry Pi, and this sits on the board. This is a slightly big board. And the reason why this board is big, I don't know whether you can see this, it's mostly because of the low-pass filters. And this is a 40 watts transmitter, actually. It's not QRP anymore. So I'm just populating the board right now. Probably in a day or two, I'll be able to finish this and then get it on air. Let's see how it works.
Oh, nice.
But there are a lot of oops in this board. This is what happens if you lay out circuit boards at 2 a.m. But I hope to get this sorted out sooner than later.
Oh, I know that one. Yeah, that's cool. All right, thank you, Brian, for that question. So we're getting on pretty much on the almost the end. In terms of, there are 2 things I want to ask you. So Wild Cascadia Radio Anime, she asks, any band? What? So this is all bands, right? It covers.
This is all bands HF, yeah. There's another
And
homebrew
that
project
means
that I've been working on parallelly, which is actually a VHF SSBCW transceiver, because most of the homebrewers just concentrate on HF, and for people
right.
like Cat, it might be a good idea for them to get a VHF set which they can actually build themselves and use it, because a lot of
Yeah.
technicians, right, in the US.
Yeah, and the technicians they could operate on the VHF weak signal.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
Yeah,
even like
right.
Cat. You could, VHF is a lot more than just the handheld radios. You could make long distance contacts using VHF single sideband and stuff too. I'm sure you know that, but that'll be something to get into. Yeah, so it's anime wild cascader radio. She's very intrigued. She's a very fun character. I think we're gonna have her on the show sometime. All right, so final thoughts. There's one question I want to ask you. What do you think about the future generation of being able to build radios? One, and two, what do you think about right to repair?
I think, right to repair is something that I would really, really insist on, for most of my, equipment. I think it's a pity that people are moving away from that, right? I'm a
Right.
very strong advocate of, simplicity and being able to replace. And for example, my laptops, I change laptop about, probably 3 times, every third or fourth year. I just work on ThinkPads and they last a long time. Or even a Mac. Ehsan's Mac is about 10 years old, right? So, but the thing is, why can't we upgrade it? Why can't I change the CPU like I do it for a desktop? Actually, my son's desktop is 20 years old. So,
Right.
at times we've bought a new power supply for it, or a new, motherboard. Then he says, I need to play games. So you put up a graphics coprocessor. You just keep upgrading it all the time, right? So the chassis remains the same. And we even replace the chassis at one point in time. So, most of the electronic equipment is dynamic in nature. You
Yeah.
just keep reconfiguring it all the time. I think that's a pretty bad idea. About homebrewing itself, I would imagine that this is the best time to be a home brewer, really, because for example, Mouser will give you any amount of components to any part of the world for $20, which is really incredible, right? So one $20 thing, even if you're getting let's say 10 kgs of ferrites, which no radio ham would do, but if you do that, it's still $20 to any part of the world. So
Wow.
if you're going to build a transceiver which has got, let's say, $30 of parts in it, 30 plus 20, you just add 20 to it, and you have a monthly pack of $20 coming into you, which completely set you up. And the best quality parts, whether they are it's an SI 5351, SI 570,
Right.
The oscillator chips, the toroids, anything is pretty much possible there. But coupled with that also is the fact that most of the hams are actually aging.
Right.
Cat is an aberration. She's an outlier here, but we are all, aging. But I think there will be a resurgence in ham radio.
Yeah.
Why do people still cycle, and why do they still, climb mountains, and why do they still build? The maker movement itself is pretty big, right? The maker movement is pretty big. And I think if there are accessible designs, people would like to build them, experiment with them, and
Yeah.
learn electronics. We are all about experimenting. So I know that people would like to do it, but they just don't know how to start,
Right.
doing this. So, Michelle is saying, something about really talented kids coming through universities in India doing software
Yeah.
stuff. Do you think there's much of interest in them to do hardware and radio stuff? Well, the problem is this, that most of us Indians are so constrained economically that we just want to get onto a job. And the
Right.
reason why we are in the university is to do a job. And people who would like to do some co-curricular activities, get into other stuff, build other stuff, which is not going to be on the test, they'd
Right.
rather skip it. Okay, so that is actually what has killed creativity in the young people in India quite a lot. They are creative, they're extremely intelligent, but they do not get the time to explore these things, especially when they're in the undergrad. And there's a big rush for them to, get, in quote, settle down, get a job, get married or whatever. So But given that there are kids who are doing good work, I mean, including in my own, radio club, the local radio club, the Lama Khan Radio Club, who are doing stuff, small stuff, but I mean, they need to start somewhere. And one big
Right.
problem with homebrewing now is that it costs more to set up a homebrew lab than to, just buy an IC7300 and be done with it. So one of the things which I did, is a project called Antuino. I don't know whether you've heard of it, which is
I
an
heard of
RF lab.
Antuino.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So
That
it
is
can
yours.
actually do, yeah. So it can actually
So
do a
that's
lot
your
of stuff.
project.
Yeah, it's my
You
project.
made that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So the thing is, the Antuino is a spectrum analyzer, a signal generator, an SWR meter, all of them put together. So the VHF set that I'm building now, I'm trying to build it without switching on my Rigol spectrum analyzer and the oscilloscope. So far, I've managed to do it without that. So that's actually, I mean, I tried bringing the price down. It's still $100 because of our production. I think, it should actually cost $50 for people to own it, just like the Nano VNA. Then we'd probably be able to put this into hands of more kids who would be able to, do something with it.
Right. So I have a couple of questions, and then we're going to tie the ribbons on this. Ed, WAD8KCT, thanks for your patience. I wanted to bring that one in about the universities first, so I appreciate your patience. Is a Raspberry Pi RF noise a problem?
Not really. But nevertheless, I think it requires a bit of, screening and shielding, and which is what we'll have to put into the radio. But I do hear quite a few birdies. And these birdies actually came from the codec board which was being put onto it. So actually, there's a trick to figuring out where the birdie is coming in from. What you do is, let me see if I still have it with me here.
So if you know, the birdies are basically internally generated noise, but they're like a single point.
Yeah. So what you do is you take a BNC connector like that, right, and put a loop onto this, right, and then you put this onto the Antuino, and you sweep the band, and it'll actually, now because it's a small loop, and you go around the Raspberry Pi, you can figure out what birdies are coming out of the Raspberry Pi rather than anywhere else. So that's actually one way to figure out where exactly this stuff is coming out from. By the way, this also will work for your RFI hunting. It's a simple trick. You use something like an Antuino, and you can go around and sort of sniff the RF out.
That's something I'm going to get, one of the Antuinos. I've been looking at it. I didn't realize that you made it, so I'm definitely going to get one. One final question before we wrap this up, and I think this is a good one.
Maria.
Okay, Kat's got a question.
I've got a question. Are there different regulators in India that are similar to the FCC that we have here?
Oh, yes. The big evil state here is represented by the Wireless Planning Commission. But actually, they've become pretty good and efficient now. Everything is completely computerized. So they have you can apply online for your ham license, and there are local monitoring stations which actually have very little job these days, but they actually do the tests. You have about 7-8 of them around India. You have to get a time from them and go over there, or like in today, if there are sufficient number of people gathered in one place, they'll come there, if there are about 40-50 people, and get the licenses. There are 2 licenses here. There's a restricted license and a general license, just 2 classes now. The restricted license, both the licenses allow you to operate on HF, but this is the tricky part. The restricted license does not allow you to operate on CW, which is odd, because the restricted license is the codeless license, and the general license requires you to do an 8 words per minute Morse code. They're not costly at all. My life license, which is a 20-year license, costed me about 200 rupees, which is about $3. So it's the cost is really nominal.
So what if I wanted to get an Indian license? What would be the procedure?
Well,
are they available to foreigners or not?
Oh, yes. Yeah, you could get a reciprocal license, and the easiest way to do that is to ask Bharati to get it for you. She knows the process well enough. She's helped so many people. Good. In fact, she helped me with my license. So
when we have all of these restrictions gone, I definitely want to take some traveling time and see my. I want to visit. I want to visit India. All right. We got one last one. Kat, do you have anything else? No, we can't hear you, Kat. You're on mute.
I'm sorry, I muted myself. I think there was a question about the cost of the licenses there and things like that.
about
But I don't have any
$2.
questions.
It's a few dollars in rupees. Okay. All right. So the last one from Faisal Akbar. And he says, what advice do you have for young operators like my daughter from BE3 SFA?
Yeah, I mean, given the fact that I have one young son who's still in school, I think the big challenge is to get them off the screens. And
Right.
One of the things is to get them to do things physically. So, for example, I keep dragging him out to, for example, saw, drill, solder, something which in an hour's time produces some tangible results, whether it's an audio amplifier or something like that. That's one part of it. The other is to introduce the adventure and gaming part into it. For example, contesting. Now, contesting is, pretty much similar to any other game. I mean, you're basically shooting them down. You're doing, search and pounce or, whatever things. I mean, it can be as in quotes violent as it gets. So, I mean, they need to compete. They need to show off. They need to do all that stuff, right? So, if you take them out on field days, ask them to set up the station and make a couple of contacts and get into contesting. I think that's the place to hook them on to. With simple primitive radios which they've built themselves. So, I mean, this generation is sort of, I'm not sure, probably, this is dad speak, but sort of giving up on doing things on their own rather than, just buying it off. I mean, where do you get the milk? Not from a cow, but a supermarket or whatever, right? I mean,
It's kind of funny to hear India, and Indians talk this way, because I know, like my grandparents. So my grandfather was a cocoa farmer, and he also he had a lot of other crops he used to grow too, and his whole life was centered around agriculture, because that's basically what his parents taught him.
Yeah.
And today you have the young generation, technology and such, and some of them, I don't know, you have to watch the kids, because I know some kids, they don't want to do anything at all, but yeah, you have to definitely keep it up. All right. Well, listen, thank you very, very much, Farhan. This was very, very nice. And of course, you're welcome back anytime. You have anything new as well, too. But of course, anytime you want to come on and talk, you have an open invitation.
Oh, lovely.
All right. And
thank you so much.
And Kat, I'll leave you to tie the ribbons on it, and we'll talk next week.
Awesome. So, everybody, this is Two Chicks and a Radio. Thank you, Farhan, for coming on tonight. Don't forget to catch us next week at 8:30 p.m., 9:30 Central, 9:30 Eastern for all you people.
And 1:30 Zulu.
And 1:30 Zulu. There we go. UTC time. And we will be on my channel, which is Dixie DX Amateur Radio. Don't forget to like and subscribe to her channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to hit those notification bells, because if not, you're not going to know when we go live. So, everybody, 73, Dixie DX, W4DXY, Rhea
Shack, and 2RJ, keep on hamming.
Bye-bye.
And bye, everybody.
All right.